In real-world physics, if an object bounces off a wall, the angle with which it bounces off is the same as the angle with which it approaches the wall. The UFO tokens in Undefined Fantastic Object behave in a very similar way. The animal tokens in Wily Beast and Weakest Creature seem to have completely different behavior. And that behavior is actually a lot more complicated than you think. But let's start with the simplest way that is also correct according to physics. So, we have a line F, and we have a point approaching line F. The way in which the point approaches F is represented by this arrow V. This arrow V has two components, 1 and -1. And this 1 represents how fast the point is moving along the horizontal axis, like this. And this -1 represents how fast the point is moving along the vertical axis, like this. This 1 and -1 are the point's velocity, and the length of this arrow is the point's speed. Note that the speed, aka the length of the arrow, by itself cannot be used to also determine where the arrow is pointing to. But the numbers that tell us where the arrow is pointing to also tell us the length of the arrow. And if you put the speed across the horizontal axis 1, and the speed across the vertical axis -1 together, you get a diagonal arrow that looks like this. Though here I also use the word speed in order to refer to the different speeds that make up the velocity. So, what do we have to do with this arrow in order to create another arrow that represents how the point is moving after it has bounced off of F? Well, it's actually really simple. The vertical component stays exactly the same. The only thing we have to change is the horizontal component. And what we make it do is we make it go at the exact same speed, but in the other direction. And that means putting a minus sign in front of it. Similarly, if the point actually bounces off a bottom edge, then we leave the horizontal component exactly the same and simply put a minus sign in front of the vertical component. And this is how UFO bouncing in Undefined Fantastic Object works. So now let's take a look at how animal token bouncing in Wily Beast and Weakest Creature works. So here I am at the code that's actually responsible for making tokens bounce. Nobody understands what's going on, right? Let's switch to PowerPoint. Every frame, the game performs a bunch of checks on every token, and it will check if the token is at the horizontal screen edge, and if it is, it will flip the X direction, and if the token is at the vertical screen edge, it will flip the Y direction. This is actually exactly what I described earlier. And if the game does any of these things, it will also set a little flag that indicates that the token did indeed bounce off the screen edge. This flag is then later used to do other things because the token bounced off the screen edge. Now, before I move on, I just want to quickly explain what the absolute value of a number is. So for a positive number, the absolute value is just the number, but for a negative number, its absolute value is also the negative number but without the minus sign. And now we get into the randomness of token bouncing. So if the absolute value of the X velocity is higher than 0.2, then the X velocity gets set to a random number from 0 to 0.3 plus 0.5, or from 0 to negative 0.3, and then 0.5 is subtracted. The same is also done for the Y velocity. There's one thing to keep in mind. They would mess with the speed of the token, and the game doesn't want the speed of a token to change. And to make sure that the speed of a token does indeed stay the same, the game will first of all calculate the new angle that our token is traveling at. This is done with the atan2 function. And then this new angle is passed to another helper function that will complete the rotation. Now this function does more than just make sure that our token then travels at a speed of 1. Because what you might have noticed is that this function also takes a thing called Token Manager, and I've highlighted it in red. This will be used to get information about every other token on screen as well. Here we are at the code that actually does the completion of the rotation. Now don't worry about all the lines, I will highlight the lines to worry about in red, like this. The first thing that we'll take a look at is this. So what this does is it takes an angle and a length for an arrow, and it will generate X and Y components out of that. This is what ends up ensuring that the speed of our token is indeed 1. The game will now iterate over every single token on screen. This is what the token manager was passed in for. First, the game checks if the token being looked at and the token that just bounced off the screen have a distance less than 24. Next, the game checks if the difference in speed between the two tokens is greater than 0.97. And for the first 10 tokens that meet this condition, the animal token that just bounced off the screen gets rotated by another 222.5 degrees. Which tokens the first 10 are depends on the order in which they were spawned in. What I mean with that is that the first token is the first token to be spawned in and to not have despawned either by getting collected or by just flying off the screen. And now that the bouncing of the animal token off of the screen edge is complete, make sure to subscribe and check out my other videos.